welcome to the final keynote speech, so you are finally done. First of all, I would like to say thank you for the reward I already get and also this invitation that I have the pleasure of speaking to you here about another topic. So what we heard so far is more from a macro perspective, let's say. Now we'll go a little bit into detail from the company's point of view. But let's start me with I have always a kind of hard time to, let's say, talk about the European perspective of CSR, because we have different necessities to deal with. We have in the southern part, we have a more, let's say, social impact. In the northern part, we have a more environmental impact due to the problems we face there. And the Central European countries, where Germany is part of, we have a more economic point of view. So the triple bottom line is all about Europe from a different importance level, let's say. And what is our vision? And this is also the vision of CBS, Global Business School, where Professor René Schmidt and I come from. We have this issue that companies always believe sustainability is very expensive. So this is the first step. And the next one is now that we try to convince companies that they can make a profit by being sustainable. So there is no dilemma anymore, so that you have to decide to be sustainable or successful from a profit point of view. And the next level we would like to achieve is now that we convince or try to convince companies to understand that they can, in the future, they can only be successful if they are sustainable. So because of, that's the important change we would like to realize here. How do we achieve this? So at CBS we have different pillars, layers, let's say, where we try to work. A very important one is the practical strategies. This is where I would like to focus on with my speech today. What kind of strategies can be implemented in companies? The second one is the educational approach. We just learned a lot about education. That's very important at CBS. We have, or I'm pretty sure that we are among the first business schools in Europe having implemented a kind of, we call it, integrated curriculum of CSR. So CSR is part of every lecture. We do not have 2 or 3 lectures dealing with CSR on top. Now we have it integrated. So if one of my colleagues is giving a lecture in Introduction to Finance, there are also 2 or 3 lectures dealing with sustainable finance. So all of them have to do it. And it's quite easy because from the very beginning, sustainability was in the center of our research and educational activities. So we do not have to convince our lecturers to do so. They are willing to follow our vision. And the next important thing is we always integrate innovative teaching formats. The latest one is the so-called innovative building blocks. I always have to remember this name, but our Vice President for Quality and Education invented this term. And what we do here is we combine our students and the companies. So our students are working on real-life problems of companies, and they have to present in front of the CEO, so whoever is responsible for this project. And this has a very, very positive joint benefit for both parties. Companies learn some fresh new ideas, as you already mentioned, because our students have a completely different point of view, because they are not socialized to the company culture. And the employees working maybe for already 10, 20 years within this company, they also can teach our, let's say, students based on their experience what is important in companies, how to bring your ideas in and how to convince the CEOs that they should follow your strategies and so on. So this is the idea we try to follow here, that from the very beginning our students have to, let's say, work in companies and bring those 2 knowledge pools together. And sustainable leadership, I will not go into detail today, but my personal opinion is that leadership is something, if you really focus on a good educational approach based on CSR, we also have responsible responsible leaders, and for me the more important part is accountability. Because everybody wants to be responsible, but to be accountant for something, this is not what a lot of people are really willing to do. So living with the consequences. This is a very important aspect in responsibility. Coming back to what I just said with this old paradigm to be sustainable or profitable, there is another, let's say, pair of terms, which is resilience and responsibility. And due to research, most of the supply chain responsible employees within a company, they believe that the supply chain should not be resilient and sustainable at the same time. But to be honest, it's very important that you understand that if you have a resilient supply chain, it's more sustainable and the other way around. Because if you have a sustainable supply chain, you have to face a lower risk level. That's very important. And this is what companies also have to learn. And maybe a final aspect, I would like to, let's say, bring in the idea that we do not think in this trade-off relations. It's not a question to be efficient or sustainable or profitable or resilient. So like a cake, I'm an Austrian, yeah, so I like chocolate cakes, a huge cake, and we have to find out, okay, which part should be resilient, which part should be, let's say, efficient, because efficiency is also important for sustainability, because we cannot be environmentally sustainable if we are not efficient. And this is all about resource efficiency, for example. So maybe we should change our thinking a little bit and not always sticking to these trade-off decisions we have in mind. This is the German approach based on the UN guidelines, let's say, for sustainable supply chain management. I will not go into detail here because I will focus on some parts of this supply chain. As you can see, the first 4 areas, this is what you know from a regular planning process. First of all, you have to describe your sustainable supply chain, then you have to think about the risk level, the impact you have to face, then you have to think about measures. And the final point is, you will directly learn it from one of the next slides. I see this a little bit differently because, first of all, I will think about the capabilities, about the potential I have within the company, and then I will start up thinking about the risk level and what we can do in terms of dealing with the risk in the supply chain. And the rest is more or less dealing with the supplier, which is also another focus of my speech, because the supplier is, I would say, that's the key element in the supply chain. Because you're only as sustainable as your suppliers are, you're only as innovative as your suppliers are, you're only as digital as your suppliers are, so the suppliers are somehow describing your performance level within the company. That's very important. So the relationship management to the suppliers will be key for the success of the company in the future. And the reporting, the final part here, this is from a German point of view also very important because we have now the new European Union guidelines for reporting, which are from my point of view also very, very supportive. Why? Because they force companies to have a strategy in place. That's the important thing. It's not about being sustainable in terms of donating to 500 different projects. It's a point that you have to make clear where is the strategy. It's not so important that you're really successful because we do not have a lot of really supportive KPIs in place so far, so I will explain this a little bit later on too. The really important point is, what is my strategy? Where do I want to become better? Where do I want to improve my activities? And if you are not capable of making this clear, you have a problem. You don't have a problem if you say, okay, I didn't make it, so some of the KPIs, they didn't work out so far, that's fine. But you had a strategy in place. And now I would like to focus on some, let's say, parts of the supply chain, some key areas, because I can definitely talk for hours, days, when it comes to the point of a sustainable supply chain. First of all, I would start only one slide, but I think that's really important because you have to understand the history of Germany. And the first part is here, we have the social market economy. And the small and medium-sized enterprises, they are the backbone of our success. And we have now the 7th year's anniversary of the social market economy, and the question is this success model of Germany still true? Because we have this, from the very beginning, we have this focus on prosperity, but at the same time, making sure that we achieve the highest level of social protection. Yeah? So the social part is already within our, let's say, DNA, economic DNA. And the next step will be to find out, let's call it social market economy 2.0, yeah, because we have now the challenges with globalization, we have the challenges with digitalization, we have the climate change, yeah, we had the problem already discussed today several times, we have aging population, yeah, which is a real issue in Europe. So the question is, how can we transfer this model, yeah, into these new ideas and challenges we have to deal with. Before I give you some ideas about, let's say, a sustainable supply chain, I would like to focus on two basic aspects, let's say. First of all, and this is always very funny because I always use this in our EMBA classes, yeah, with students with a lot of working experience already, and I always ask them, if you have to, let's say, systemize your company, what is your company? An innovator, propagator, investor in terms of sustainability. And they really have, most of them, yeah, they have a really hard time to describe this. Yeah? But I am pretty sure that it's very important before you start with some kind of sustainability strategies, you have to somehow decide why you are sustainable within the company. Yeah? There is a huge difference. Let's start with the propagators because in let's say, in terms of a sustainable supply chain, this is not so important because they are basically creating awareness. So like companies like Coca-Cola, they are not really willing to explain a lot how they introduce sustainability into their strategies. Why? Because Coca-Cola itself, yeah, the brand is not so sustainable because it's an unhealthy product. But they create awareness. Yeah? They tell people, okay, what happens if you have too much sugar and stuff like this. Then we have the innovators, they have to be sustainable. Why? Because the resources they use, they cannot be used anymore. Yeah? Because they are not there anymore, yeah? Scarce resources. Or you have legal restrictions. Or the final consumer, yeah, is forcing you, yeah, to come up with new technologies and ideas. And the investor, this is from my point of view, also a very interesting model because the investors, they want to be sustainable, but they are focusing on activities and strategies where they definitely know they can do a better job in terms of achieving their targets. Yeah? So they are focusing on certain activities, and therefore you definitely need a strategy. You need a sustainability vision in your company, you need a strategy, and you need to know what to do. Yeah? And this is the important thing here with the investors. They don't do it because they have to, yeah? They want to, yeah? And they have a clear profit. And maybe I will not say profit, they have a clear, let's say, target, and they are capable of meeting their targets. This could be also a higher performance level or an innovation, so it's not necessarily only money in the end. And then we have developed at CBS, let's say, marketing-related understanding of a sustainable supply chain, which is it's based on behavioral theories. To be honest, I'm not a big fan of all these institutional theories with transaction cost and principal agent, for example. Why? Because with those kind of theories, you cannot explain a long-term relationship. Yeah? And with CSR and with digitalization, you need relationship management. Yeah? And you need to set up long-term relationships with all the stakeholders. Yeah? In my respect, I talk about the suppliers, but there are different other stakeholders who have to be considered within this, let's say, network. And the very, very simple idea behind this is joint target achievement. So you should, let's say, as a company, you should give your stakeholders the possibility to also achieve their targets. And then there is no reason for opportunistic behavior. And opportunistic behavior is very harmful in our society and economy. Why? Because in the long run, both parties will lose. And if we avoid this, we have no waste of resources, and then we are back to sustainability. Yeah, so a very, very easy understanding, but it's based on behavioral theories, and behavioral theories are not very popular within the economy. Yeah, that's the problem so far. I already told you that small and medium enterprises are the backbone of the success of Germany, and therefore we implemented a kind of green procurement process for small and medium-sized companies. Why? Because they don't have the resources. Yeah? It's not like a huge global operating corporation, yeah, they have a lot of resources. For them it's easy. But within a small, medium-sized company, you really have to be careful how many resources you have available, what to do with them. And therefore, we started with the first step, the so-called behavior change model. Because first of all, you have to somehow engage. In terms of marketing, we talk about stakeholder delightment. So you try to engage them and give them purpose. That's very important, because if your own employees are not understanding the basic ideas, it will never work with the other stakeholders. So first of all, you have to create the required potential within your company. You have encouraged them. You will see it directly later on, because we went then a step further in combination with the sustainable development goals, which will be the next step here. But this mind shift, to create this new mindset, that's the first point. Once you have this, you start thinking about green procurement activities. That could be auditing processes, and it turned out for the companies the most important steps are, first of all, create standards, because all the companies, they come up with their own idea how to implement green procurement, which is very time consuming. So if we would have standards, it's a lot easier. This is missing, and knowledge. So they all say we have to focus on education, because definitely our stakeholders, they do not have enough knowledge to follow us. The next step is then, and this is the major part of green procurement, it's supplier relationship management. We have to, again, we have to educate the suppliers, we have to clearly communicate our requirements. This is very important. Suppliers have to understand why they should be sustainable. And then this is now my new area where I would like to focus on research, the cultural difference. So it's very important. The companies work with global supply chains, and you cannot expect a supplier somewhere in Asia, let's say, to follow the same rules like you do in Europe. That's not possible. So we have to find a common understanding here, and that's the reason why I like the SDG so much, because we have a global understanding. So even though every country has its, let's say, own ideas how to define the SDGs, we have this global understanding, and that's very important to set up those global sustainable supply chains. And finally, the KPIs, but I will directly go on to the next slide, because I have to be honest here, the KPIs we have in place for green procurement, they are really useless. So we have a few very basic qualitative data, and this is not really working so far. But I am now supervising a PhD project, and this is the focus, to set up for green procurement a really cool evaluation system. So I hope it will work out, but so far I cannot present any kind of results. So the final step, the SDGs, this is also one of my major research areas right now. The SDGs are definitely a very important tool for us to create this common understanding, a worldwide understanding of sustainability. What is still missing from our point of view is the link to the companies. Companies are basically lost, and I will directly give you an example. What I mean with they are somehow lost. So we need some concepts to, let's say, bridge the gap between the idea of the SDGs and the possibilities of a company to address and achieve those SDGs in the long run. So the idea of the United Nations is perfectly fine, also all the guidelines they have published so far, but in between are the companies, and they have to play this game sooner or later, and they have some real issues right now to realize this. So our first impact, so this might be a little bit too much for one slide, but this is a very recent publication. It's not published yet, but the article is accepted right now. We try to implement SDGs into a supply chain. First of all, I'm always advising companies, because companies are working according to the triple bottom line. So they organize their results according to economic, social, or environmental, let's say, performance level. First of all, we have to somehow bring SDGs and triple bottom line together, so that they know, okay, if I have some really good projects going on in the social area, I also know I can address 2 or 3 SDGs dealing with the social impact. First step. Next step, what I just discussed in the green procurement process, the UN there is a guideline from the United Nations dealing with sustainable supply chain management, and they came up with a very good catalog of different activities company can implement. So we do not have to come up with a new catalog, that's not necessary. What is important for me is how to bring them together. And this we did according to the different areas of the behavior change model. As you can see here, enable, exemplify, engage, and encourage. Encourage, for example, to give rewards to the suppliers. You have to be careful because sometimes NGOs accuse you then of bribing your suppliers, but if you use the money in terms of improving your performance level, then it's okay. Enable, it's about education, it's about documentation. And also, maybe one point here with the documentation, supplier audits are very dangerous somehow, because if you force suppliers to stick with a certain documentation rules, you have to set up without explaining to them why they have to do so, what they start doing is cheating. So this is very, very important. We have a lot of empirical evidence for this right now, so we have to make sure that first of all, before we start with these auditing processes, we give them a purpose, that they understand why they have to do this. Otherwise, they try to circumvent the rules. Because if they do this and other suppliers in this country area don't do this, they have a competitive disadvantage. So we have to be careful with this. And finally, this is the model on the right side, also from the United Nations, very similar to what we developed for the green procurement area. And I would like to focus on one aspect, the second one, the evaluation. This is the process dealing with the SDGs in the supply chain. And the really interesting thing here is that companies believe they have to address all 17 SDGs. They can't do this. So they have to focus. There must be a hierarchy somewhere. We have first research results, but from my point of view, they are not sufficient. They do not really provide guidelines for companies how to deal with this and how to find out which SDGs are the best ones. I did the first research, unfortunately not published so far, but I will give you another example from a research which is already published to explain to you what I mean with companies are a little bit lost. We analyzed supplier evaluation systems and the criteria used there within 6 different industries. And in these industries, we always analyze the 5 most important companies. All German-based, can be global companies, but German-based. And we try to find out, okay, which SDGs are somehow addressed by using the different criteria, or what kind of SDGs they want to address by using certain supplier evaluation criteria. To give you one first insight, the first 3 SDGs, no poverty, well-being, and no hunger. All companies believe they have a direct impact on this, but this is nonsense. You cannot directly impact poverty in an area. Maybe all companies together, or indirectly, if you train your suppliers, and if you pay, let's say, a kind of minimum wage so that families can survive, or that you somehow support activities so that you can bring down the level of child labor, stuff like this. So you have indirect impact on this. On the other side, as you can see, education does not play a major role, but education is the key. Now we have to educate all stakeholders, otherwise we will never be successful in the long run. And finally, on this slide, the indicators with life on land and life below water. The companies simply believe they have no impact on this, but any kind of environmental activity is somehow paying for this, SDGs. So this is exactly what I mean. Companies have honestly no real idea and understanding how they can achieve or how they can help to achieve the SDGs. And in the long run, we have a national system in place. So Germany, for example, we have a clear understanding of the SDGs. So maybe you might say, Germany, no poverty, how is this important? But in Germany, no poverty means that we try to steadily reduce unemployment rates, so the goal is 0, which is, right now we are very close, but we had also other times where it was not that close. And what is more important, that the gap between rich and poor is not increasing, we also try to decrease it. So we have this understanding, and then we have in the next step, we have to give the companies then some ideas what they can do in terms of meeting those requirements from the German government. And this will be then all part of the reporting guidelines we will have in place sooner or later. Now we have a commitment and we have norms, but we do not have a law so far. So at my final statement for today is dealing with the human rights and well, let's say, to give you an idea why it's, from our point of view, so important that companies are responsible. Yeah? We always need laws, government has to, let's say, provide this framework, yeah, we all operate in, but it's the responsibility of the companies. As you can see here from the middle part, this is what companies can do in terms of respecting the human rights. And in Europe right now, human rights are very, very important. So the Human Rights Declaration and to find ways to, let's say, realize this is now a really interesting topic, but also a very difficult one. Why? Because transparency is not there. So we do not have a full transparency of the whole global supply chain we are working with, and therefore it's so difficult. Last year, I gave a speech at, let's say, lawyer convention from lawyers from Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, and I was the only one from the economic field. And we discussed this, and the lawyer's position was, I learned this then sooner or later, they said, okay, but companies, they have to be responsible for everything they do. Yeah, so it's not that they can't do it, they don't want to do it because it's expensive. And I said, sorry, that's not true, because even though companies want to do it, they can't do it, because this transparency is missing. So there are certain areas where we simply cannot make sure that certain human rights requirements can be fulfilled. So we have to be careful with this. And we also, and then we are back to this interdisciplinary approach, because we also have to understand what other people think about sustainability. Yeah? We have to bring in this knowledge, and we have to develop this further. And maybe you learned now a lot about the vision of Cologne Business School and my colleagues. And my personal vision is, and companies are basically laughing at me because of this right now, I hope this will change sooner or later, but my personal vision is that if every company starts taking over responsibility for the really minor part they have within the global supply chain, then if everybody is doing this, we have a sustainable global supply chain in the long run. So this is what I understand, or we try to understand, or how to redefine a sustainable responsibility based on companies which are operating on a global scale. And this finally, but I would say this is not so important anymore, because here are again the same drivers like I already mentioned before. It's top management approach. If the top management is not understanding what you are doing here, you have a problem. The next important aspect is capacity building. We also mentioned this. It's about understanding, it's about knowledge, it's about support. You have to deal with this. The risk mapping, this is also one point which is one of the weak points of companies. Companies do not really know how to describe the risk level they have to face within the supply chain. Maybe a final example here, I'm now working with my student on a coursework topic in sustainable supply chain management. Because companies are really good in terms of describing and working with traditional risks. So they know about this, but if we have this complexity, and if we have to also bring in some technology aspects and so on, then they are lost. They can only work on a single risk, and then they try to find a solution, and then the next one. But the problem is, these are risk maps, and they are all somehow influencing each other. So if you only work on one of those hubs, let's say, another one is popping up, and becoming even more important. So I said to the students, okay, try to focus on a very small risk net, let's say, set it up, and try to find out how companies are dealing with this. And then maybe if we bring all the results together from the different industries, we come up with a kind of interesting solution. So what kind of, let's say, smaller risk nets or risk, how to express this, so like a cobweb, so something like this, how they can be addressed and achieved by the different companies. Oh, this is obviously the timer is always loud. This had been my 30 minutes, but I'm perfectly fine because this was my final slide, and the last one I will skip and clear. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope you get some insights onto.
Thank you so much. We also have a certificate of appreciation to be due. So 我们再度欢迎到国际所所长来为我们颁发这个感谢状。